People all over the world have heard about the land of tornadoes and cowboys, the huge state of Texas. Its area is 5 times the size of England, which has given rise to many jokes about the enormous territory and the Texans' predilection for the corresponding size. Residents of the state highly respect cowboy traditions, which evokes considerable respect. Of course, many people have an idea of the political dominance of the Republican Party in Texas and the governorship of George W. Bush, but few know the history of the Lone Star State and the 6 flags that represent different periods of its formation. Independent in spirit, the distinctive state ranks second in population, divided into 254 counties with the capital in Austin. Long before the arrival of Europeans, the territory of Texas was inhabited by various Indian tribes. The Caddo in the east, the Pueblo in the west, and the people of Mesoamerica in the south. Much later, under the pressure of the arriving colonists, the number of indigenous people grew. Apaches, Kiowa, Wichita, Comanches, and others came. Today, there are 3 officially recognized Indian nations: the Alabama, Kickapoo, and Pueblo. Currently, indigenous tribes constitute 0.3 of the state's total population. But we must pay tribute to the Indians, from whose language, more precisely from the language of the Caddo tribe, the name Texas came, meaning friend or ally. The first Europeans to visit Texas were the Spanish. In the early 16th century, Alonso Alvarez de Pineda sailed along the northern Gulf Coast, allowing the first map of the area to be drawn. 10 years later, in 1528, Alvar Cabeza de Vaca became the first European to explore the interior of the future state. However, this was against the will of the Spanish navigator, since after the shipwreck the expedition was captured by the Indians and only a couple of people survived and reached Mexico. Later, Spanish expeditions in search of gold crossed modern Arizona, New Mexico, and reached Oklahoma and Kansas. Moving from the east, they passed through the current southern states of Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and many others. And only at the end of the 17th century, the first settlements appeared in Texas. The Spaniards, fleeing from rebellious Indian tribes in New Mexico, set up camp near the modern city of El Paso, where the city later grew. Around the same time, in 1685, a French expedition led by René de La Salle landed by mistake in the Matagorda Bay area. Initially, it was planned to found a colony at the mouth of the Mississippi River, but the navigator made a mistake 600 miles to the west. The French moved inland, founding Fort St. Louis. However, a prosperous life was hampered by deadly diseases and clashes with the indigenous population, which forced the inhabitants to leave the founded fort 2 years later. The appearance of competitors in Texas seriously worried the Spaniards, which prompted them to found the first settlement in the east of the future state, San Francisco de los Tayas, the area of modern San Antonio, at the end of the century. 3 years later, due to smallpox, to which the Indians had no immunity, the indigenous people forced the settlers to leave the village. At the beginning of the next century, relations between 2 European kingdoms, Spain and France, became strained. The French actively developed the lands of western Louisiana, which caused considerable indignation of the Spaniards, who tried to maintain the new Philippines. Texas, as a buffer zone, the confrontation between the 2 states in the Old World turned into colonies. The French captured the Spanish settlements in East Texas, which the latter were able to recapture only a couple of years later. Subsequently, the development of new territories was complicated by the hostility of the Indians, who constantly attacked the colonialists. Only by the middle of the 18th century did the Spaniards manage to make peace with one of the tribes, although others remained faithful to their methods of fighting outsiders. During Napoleon's time, western Louisiana again became French, but in 1803, the emperor sold these lands to the United States. The question remained with the undefined borders of the United States. They claimed all of modern Texas, although the Spaniards defended the right to its western part. It was not until 1819 that the Americans recognized Spanish claims to the territory in exchange for Florida. The very next year, Moses Austin, who lived in Missouri, turned to the governor of Texas for permission to develop the vast and sparsely populated lands of the future state. A year later, approval was received, according to which 300 American families could move to this territory. Since his father died suddenly, his work was continued by his son, Stephen Austin. The situation was complicated by Mexico's victory in the Revolutionary War, as Texas became one of the states of the new state. Despite the situation, Austin managed to obtain permission from the Mexican government to develop the land. More and more Americans moved to new territories, and by 1832, there were about 11,000. Stephen Austin led the new colony. He organized armed units for defense, Texas Rangers, established the Order of the Southern American States. Tensions arose almost immediately between the different cultures, the Protestant Anglo-Saxons and the Catholic Mexicans. The situation was made worse by the 1830 ban on slavery and immigration from the United States, which led to armed conflict between the settlers and the Mexican army, which escalated into the Texas War of Independence. The fight was fierce. Hundreds of soldiers died, and the Mexicans showed reckless cruelty against captured colonialists. But the war did not stop the wayward Americans who signed the Texas Declaration of Independence on March 2, 1836, in Washington, on Brazos. Thus was born the Sovereign Republic of Texas. In April, the brave General Sam Houston defeated Mexican troops at San Jacinto, and already in May a treaty was signed, under the terms of which enemy troops left the territory of the new country. The Texas hero becomes the president of an independent state, and in his honor, one of the largest metropolises in the United States, the city of Houston, is now founded. In turn, the capital of the country was named in honor of the first Secretary of State of the Republic and father of Texas, Stephen Austin. In 1838, parliamentarians of the Republic approved the national flag, which later became the state flag. It is because of him that Texas received the nickname, the Lone Star State. The territory of the new state was larger than the territory of today's state, since it included Wyoming, Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. In the south, the border with Mexico remained a disputed land over which conflicts between nations arose more than once. But in 1842, the Texans managed to defeat their southern neighbors at the Battle of Salado Creek and expel them from their land. How did an independent state become part of the USA? Two main political groups, supporters of Houston for unification with the United States, and like-minded Lamar, supporter of Texas independence, fought to determine the fate of the Republic. However, the struggle with Mexico, financial difficulties and attacks by Indian tribes forced the independent state to join the United States. In 1845, Texas became the 28th state. During the Civil War, Texas was part of the Confederacy. In 1865, it was in this state that the last battle between the North and the South took place, and 5 years later, the U.S. Congress reincorporated Texas into the state. A state constitution was later adopted, which still stands today. Texas had long been considered a pastoral and agricultural state, but when large oil reserves were discovered in the Gulf of Mexico, the economy shifted to oil production. Today's Texas is a major educational and industrial center, known for technological and scientific discoveries. Houston is also home to a human spacecraft center with NASA's Mission Control Center,